Okay, hi there, everyone. Glad you could join us today. I'm Carolyn Merrick, a program coordinator here at the center, and we have a wonderful opportunity today to hear about the story of Hugh Carr, who was a prosperous African American landowner and farmer uh, here in what has come to now be known as the Ivy Creek Nature Area, one of my favorite stomping grounds, which is in my background. And here to tell us the story of the Riverview Farm, as it was called back then, is Sue Erhardt. Sue began working at Ivy Creek Foundation in 2019, and she has over 20 years of experience working in conservation, nature, and place-based education. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Sue. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see everyone. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for this opportunity. I am so excited to be with all of you this afternoon. I wanted to, I am, as she said, the executive director of the Ivy Creek Foundation. Our mission is connecting people to the past and present by honoring the land, history, and community. Our vision is to inspire, engage our community in the stewardship of our natural resources and our rich African American cultural history. So for those of you who've come to our site like Carolyn, or maybe some of you who have never been to the Ivy Creek Natural Area, this might be what you would see in the early fall. One of our many trails. We have 7 miles of trails that people can go on. We're free and open to the public every day of the year. And here's some of our trails. You might be by the creek and see some of the water flowing. Our site is actually 219 acres. This is a preserve that borders the South Fork Ravenna Reserve in the mix of upland woods and pine stands, open fields, streams, and we have 2 miles of shoreline. Its rolling hills and diverse habitats make the Ivy Creek Natural Area an ideal site to learn about our rich natural history characteristic of Central Virginia. It has made Ivy Creek a favorite destination for visitors and community looking for a peaceful walk in the woods, and we all could use that these days. Now, some people come to see the many wildlife. So here's some painted turtles on the log. So just imagining that we're all together and we're out at the site, these might be some that we see. And then we have a lot of birders that come to see our barred owls, and they have a wonderful habitat at our site. So these are just enticing you to come out if you haven't been. And then of course, this might be what you see as you're pulling into our parking lot. The beautiful red buds and the dogwoods are starting to go. They're really putting on a show. So spring is it's a beautiful time, anytime to come, but spring is spectacular. In my opinion, I know I'm a little biased, coming out to our site. And then to give you an orientation of where we're located, here's an overhead map. You come to our site off of Earlysville Road and enter through the parking lot here and have our trails, and we're by the reservoir. Martin's Branch goes through our site. But we have this incredible site because, as Carolyn said, this incredible man named Hugh Carr. Hugh Carr was born into slavery and acquired the first 58 acres of what would become Riverview Farm shortly after emancipation. By 1890, the land accounted for more than 125 acres, making Carr among the largest African American landowners in Albemarle County at that time. Carr and his wife, Taxi Mae Hawkins, raised 7 children on Riverview Farm. Having been himself deprived of any formal education, Carr placed an emphasis on education for his children, all of whom went to school. 5 of his children earned college degrees, becoming teachers and community leaders wherever they settled. Hugh Carr was born into slavery, we think, between 1840 and 1843. Like many newly emancipated men in rural Virginia, Hugh Carr hired himself out to work on local farms, often receiving a share of crops in payment. In 1870, Hugh Carr paid John Shackelford $100, basically a down payment for the first 58-acre tract of Riverview Farm, where Carr built a residence, a home, and much later would become the Ivy Creek Natural Area. Hugh Carr continued to add to his farm, acquiring over 125 acres by 1890. So not only was Hugh Carr an incredible farmer, but an incredible father. So to realize after having so many girls and really encouraging them to become educated is truly remarkable for those times. And we're going to talk about how that importance of education played through the generations of the Carr family. So this is his oldest daughter, Mary Carr Greer. The value of education has played an integral role in the history of the Carr family. Hugh Carr's eldest daughter, shown here, Mary Louise Carr, became a prominent local educator. Like her sisters and brother, Mary Carr attended Union Ridge Graded School, a primary school established shortly after emancipation, which later became the Albemarle Training School, after Union Ridge burned down in 1893. The Carr children continued their education at Piedmont Industrial Institute in Charlottesville. Mary Carr taught school locally for several years before attending Virginia Normal and Industrial Institute in Petersburg, Virginia. It's now known as Virginia State University. Upon returning from college, she joined the faculty at Albemarle Training School, located within sight of her home at Riverview Farm. And I wanted to show you a couple pictures here. Just recently, the Albemarle Training School plaque was just installed just a couple months ago, recognizing the site. The school has been long gone, but they have a plaque recognizing where the location was. And then we found a local newspaper clipping about how dedicated Mary Carr was to education, that in 1933, 20 years after finishing her first degree in college, she went back to receive her bachelor's degree in Bachelor's of Science degree. And they wrote about that in the local paper and wrote about that. So that's just incredible. Following a program advocated by Booker T. Washington, the Albemarle Training School trained Black children in a trade school as vocational agriculture, domestic science, and industrial education, offering coursework through the 9th grade. Because remember, schools were segregated at that time. In 1931, after teaching domestic science at Albemarle Training School for 15 years, Mary Carr Greer became its third principal and oversaw a period of both physical and academic expansion and growth. During her tenure, she initiated a formal 4-year high school curriculum. And in 1979, Albemarle County memorialized her dedication to education with the opening of Mary Carr Greer Elementary School, which is still there today on Lambs Road. Now let's talk about her husband, Conley Greer. And I need to say happy birthday to Conley Greer, who just had his 138th birthday last week. In December 1913, Mary Carr married Conley Greer, who was her college sweetheart. He took over responsibilities of Riverview Farm from his father-in-law. He also became Albemarle County's first Black agent of the Virginia Agricultural Extension Division. They had one child, Louise Evangeline, who also pursued and worked in higher education. Conley Garfield Greer was born in Crumpler, North Carolina in 1883 to Moses and Lavinia Greer. Like the Carr daughters, he attended Virginia State Normal Industrial Institute, now Virginia State University, where he studied agriculture. With his marriage in 1913 to Mary Louise Carr, Conley took over the responsibilities of the farm. And in 1918, Greer was hired as the extension agent. Now, remember, this was a segregated institution, and he was the first African American extension agent. So, meaning that he was, allowed to give extension services to the African American farmers in the area, where before they really didn't have an agent. Riverview Farm was his family farm, and Greer took great care and practices both as a way to feed his family and as a way to inspire best practices within the farming community. Conley Greer served as the extension agent for 35 years until his retirement in 1953. And he passed away in April of 1956. And he's actually buried on site at the Ivy Creek Natural Area. We have a family cemetery, and he's buried there, along with Mary Carr Greer and his mother-in-law and father-in-law. So here's a picture of Conley with his oldest grandchild, Hinton. And the reason this is significant because of the main focus of the picture, that John Deere tractor. This is the first mechanized tractor he owned that he was able to purchase in the late 40s, early 50s. And before that, he had a horse and wagon, and he did everything with that horse. So he was very proud of this tractor. So Conley Greer also built this farm. So we know from archaeology and some tests that there was a barn on the site that probably Hugh Carr built, but it had either burned down or had fallen down. And so Conley Greer built this barn. We think between 1937 and 38 is the records we've been able to find. And this large barn is still there today. And before the pandemic, people were allowed to go in and visit the site and inside the barn. It's north of the Carr Greer farmhouse. It faces south, and it's 2-story. It has a 3-bay agricultural building constructed by Conley Greer himself. And these plans were a plan for this type of barn was developed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the engineers, and it was built as a way for promotion through the extension agents. So he used this barn to demonstrate model practices to other local farmers. And it was actually called a sanitary barn because if you can kind of see where my cursor is, this is cement. It was always meant to have a cement foundation so that when you had animals and things like that, it was easier to, clean it out and keep it sanitized, and to keep the parasites and pestilence down from getting into your livestock. So this was kind of revolutionary for the time. And I also want you to think about in 1937 and 38, we're in the height of a depression, and he was able to build this barn. This barn, as I said earlier, really became a demonstration site. He and Mary would host local other African American farmers from all over the area to come and, have classes in the barn about best practices. Mary, as I said earlier, was an accomplished home economics teacher. So she would talk about canning and bring kind of the women folk into the house and talk about canning and food preservation and best practices there. So they really were both natural teachers and community involved and really keeping their community together. The other thing I want you to notice is that this barn had a wide center aisle that was used by farmers to drive wagons. So in this opening here was wide enough that you could drive a barn through. So here's the hay fork. And so you'd have the hay fork come down, and you were able to put the hay in the loft with that hay fork. That is the original hay fork from the 30s. And so this was really revolutionary because you didn't have to have wheelbarrows and things like that. You really were able to use the site more efficiently by able to, drive a wagon all the way through the barn. The barn was rehabilitated in the 2000s to address repair needs, and it was actually leaning. So it's straight now. It's not the leaning tower anymore. And we now have interpretive, and I think I have a couple pictures here of what it looks like. So this is what it looked like in 1979 when the foundation began. This was what the barn looked like inside before renovation. And this is what it looks like today. It's been straightened up. We're actually redoing it again because of the pandemic. We're developing new interpretive programs in here. We're adding Wi-Fi to the barn. So you'll have, once we'll open it up again, not sure when it is, we're going to have a new visitor experience for everybody. And we're really excited about that. And then here's the loft. The loft is closed to the public, but you can see it through the power of our pictures. So it's a giant hay loft up there. So I also wanted to talk to you, I talked a little bit about archaeology before. So we've had other archaeological excavations on site. We know that Conley Greer not only, had the two jobs of being a full-time extension agent and a farmer, but he also, through the second quarter of the 20th century, had several contracts with the Charlottesville institutions to collect their trash. He made regular trips into town early in the morning, making his rounds. Greer collected the food refuge from the university and hospital cafeterias and used it to fatten his hogs. Later, he contracted with the Monticello Hotel to haul away its garbage. At least one dump site likely in use during the second quarter of the 20th century was established on his property, located just off the White Trail. The Thomas Jefferson chapter of Archaeological Society of Virginia conducted an excavation in one of the garbage dumps in April of 1998. Artifacts were found to include broken bottles, dishes, and hardware. Some of the found items are from the old Monticello Hotel in downtown Charlottesville, soon after it opened in 1926. As I said a little bit earlier, we do have a family cemetery on the site. It's located behind the farmhouse. And you can see the oldest grandchild is also buried at the site, Charles Francis Winton. We wanted to I wanted to include these two stones here. They don't have any markings on them, but the archaeologists tell us that they are traditional African headstone or footstone markers. And so we have a couple of those as well, just off this family marking as well. So I wanted to show you what the farmhouse looked like in 1979 when the Ivy Creek Foundation and Natural Area was started. So pretty disrepair. And this is what it looks like now. So last summer, our site, for those of you who may or may not know, is actually owned jointly by the city of Charlottesville and the county of Albemarle. And as part of that process, the house really needed some TLC. And so last summer, the city and county, through their wonderful support, really spent a lot of resources getting the house dried out. It was wet in the basement. It needed a new roof. It needed new gutters. The two chimneys had to be both, one on each side had to be both completely rebuilt. And so we really worked with them closely on just stabilizing the house. So the house still needs a lot more work, but at least it's stable for right now. And we're really pleased with that work. And we have plans to do much more. Also last year, before the pandemic, it was my pleasure to meet one of Mary and Conley's grandchildren, the youngest. This is Manfred Jones, who visited us in January of last year. And Manfred actually lived at the farm with his grandmother soon after his grandfather passed away from 1956 to 66. He went lived basically middle school to high school, lived on the farm with his grandmother. And he had a lot of good stories talking about growing there up there in the 50s. He had a little dog named Spud. He named it after Sputnik, which was going on at the time. He also talked about what it was like living on the farm and having his grandmother loved the piano, so he had to take piano lessons. He wasn't too thrilled about that and talked about taking piano lessons. But we had a wonderful visit with Manfred, and we have a wonderful connection with Manfred and other descendants of the Carr Greer families and the Hawkins, and we are so pleased to be working with them. And Manfred wrote a nice note to me after his visit saying, "Thank you for the work you do to preserve our family history and land." And it's such a pleasure. And I actually just talked to Manfred last week, and he's doing well. So I wanted to show you this. This is a aerial photo of the Ivy Creek Foundation. And this is, here we go, Riverview Farm. It's basically this area here. And then we have a little bit closer view here that was just taken this winter. And so to orientate you, here's the farmhouse. So Hugh Carr's original residence from, we think it was finished in about 1880, was this area here. Okay, and then Conley and Mary Carr extended the house back here and put a summer porch and another another bedroom back here, and indoor plumbing and a bathroom here. And then they added a garage. Manfred said his grandma drove a Chevy. And then there's a couple outbuildings here. This is the original 3-bay garage that Manfred said his grandfather had all his tractor and his other farming implements here. Here's the education building where many classes have been. And then the barn that we talked about, the restrooms. And then here's our welcoming kiosks. And oh, sorry, that's the tool shed. Here's the restrooms here. So just to orientate you what we're looking at. One of the great pleasures we had at the end of last year was that on December 16th, 2020, in recognition of the contributions made to the local community by the Carr Greer family, Riverview Farm is now on the site of the National Register of Historic Places, and we are so thrilled to have that recognition. So how did the foundation come to be? And so we were founded in 1979 by our founder, we really say, is this wonderful lady right here, Babs Conant, who came across this site. She was kayaking in the reservoir and saw the surveyor's tapes and stakes out. And so she found out, that this was supposed to be deemed a housing development. And so she worked with the Nature Conservancy to try to preserve the land. And they started by the Nature Conservancy buying 80 acres of the Riverview Farm. And then because it was recognized of beauty and its ecological integrity and a good opportunity to preserve green space in the rapidly urbanizing Albemarle County, the Nature Conservancy then worked with the city and county to take over the site. They procured federal funds to purchase the land and to make it a permanent natural area. And as I said earlier, they own it together, city and county. So some people, when they come to our site, they think we're a park, or we're not a park, we're a natural area. We don't have picnic benches. We don't have barbecue sites. It's not meant for, playing soccer games or baseball games. It's really a natural area to preserve the cultural and natural history of the site. So the Ivy Creek natural area, what's going on? So I will say that last year, through the pandemic, we never closed. It was important through the city and county that their natural areas stay open for as long as possible. And I'm really proud to say we never had to close our gates. We were always open to the public. And in fact, we had over 55,000 vehicles come to our site, which was a 30% increase over 2019. And so the irony that even though our buildings were closed, we had the most visitors we've ever had. So through the pandemic, we had several, and still today, I received several comments from people saying that our site has really become a refuge for them during these crazy times. And one visitor shared a very personal story with me about how she had lost a very close partner because of COVID, and was unable to have a funeral, but has been able to come to the trails where they used to walk together many times as a way to seek some refuge and solace during these troubling times. People have also come as a way to keep viewing the wildlife. And another patron wrote to me, "We enjoyed the Ivy Creek trails today. It was wonderful to get out. The air is so sweetly scented, and there are all sorts of water birds to observe and the toads to hear singing. Thank you for this rich resource in our community." So our programs have really moved virtually or family friendly, that people, as we're still the staff, we have 3 staff part-time. All our trails are maintained by volunteers. And so we still have programming, but it's all virtual. And so until we can get back together. And so we have a new kids page on our website that you can see. I hope you can see my arrow up there. That you can scroll down and basically see that there's programming for children that they can use. And our local school system is actually using our website and our cultural history pages on Riverview Farm and integrating that into their curriculum. So even though they're not able to come out just yet for field trips, they're using our site and our resources with their students to learn about Hugh Carr and his incredible family. Another program that we used to have in person, but now we're doing them virtually, is Ivy Talks. We started in February with Eric Eichenhoff, and he talked about really a sense of place and looking at historical maps and aerial photos of how the lands changed of Riverview Farm. And so I hope this works, but we uploaded all of our Ivy Talks onto our YouTube page, which is on our website, and you can get links to. And we're gonna just listen to a couple minutes of Eric's talk, and he's gonna explain a little bit about how the site has changed. I think you're gonna find it interesting. So let me just play a couple more minutes of this. So he's gonna overlay different maps, the historic map with today, what it looks like. And I think you guys will find it pretty interesting.
Road, and you would turn a left into the natural area. We have Hydraulic Road and Rio Road down here. They intersect at this intersection. This is Union Ridge Baptist Church. This is the Latter-day Saints Church, and across the street is Summers store, which is closed now. But that's that intersection, just to give you a frame of reference. Over here we have Route 29, the Rio Hill Shopping Center. There's the Kroger. This would be the Lowe's. And we have Erhardt Elementary School, along with Woodburn Road and Berkmar Road. So that's we'll be coming back to this view a few times during the rest of the talk. So I just wanted to walk through that. Because if we were to kind of roll the clock back a little bit to a time in the late 1800s, it would look a little different. And I'm just going to toggle back and forth here a few times. We'll start. I mean, the big thing you probably notice is that what is the reservoir today is a river back into the late sort of cross section of time in the late 1800s. Right? We still have the river. Also, we have a road. Rio Road used to continue on to Woodburn before it went over and crossed at Rio Mills. The road would actually go straight through here, kind of running right through Erhardt Elementary School. So that was the path of the road at one time. Modern Earlysville Road doesn't exist yet. So the way to get to hydraulic mills then was taking this road that ran down towards it would run down towards the river, track the river, and then ended up over at the mill site. We'll look a little more closely at that in a minute. We also have the Union Ridge Graded School down here, which was the first name of Albemarle Training School, located right here in the community, and then Union Ridge Baptist Church, which still stands. The orangish areas here represent some prominent African-American landowners who are immediately adjacent to Hugh Carr. So he's shown in sort of in the center here with kind of the white shaded area. These are his land holdings. And this is his Riverview farm. And in the dashed green lines, we see Ivy Creek Natural Area. So you see how that really the core of his farm would lead itself to becoming Ivy Creek. He also owns some land over in Cartersburg as well. Without going into, so we could do entire talks on just these individuals, and I know others have done some exceptional talks about them. So I won't go too much into the lives of these individuals today, but just to point out.
So I'm going to stop that sharing. I'll get back to my PowerPoint, but just to share, that is an example of some of the Ivy talks that we've had and the incredible speakers we've had. So if you're interested in that, you are welcome to go on our website and see more of Eric's talk, but it was just fascinating to hear what he had to say. We also had an Ivy talk in March about bluebirds. Mike Bishop came in and talking about trying to bring back the bluebird. We have an actual whole bluebird trail at our site, and so maybe some of you are bluebird aficionados, and that was wonderful. And our last Ivy talk of the spring will actually be this Sunday. There's still room to pre-register. This will be presented by Liz Sargent, who's a former board member of the Ivy Creek Foundation. And she's the person who wrote the application for our National Historic Preservation designation. She's a historic landscape architect. And Liz will be talking about, along with another speaker is Jody Lahendro, who's a historic architect at UVA, and they'll be co-presenting on the preservation work we did this past summer for Riverview Farm, and talking about other locations on the farm and what we're doing to try to preserve the site. So if you're interested in that, that's going to be virtually. And if you can't make it, you could at least register, and then I'll send you the link after we post it on YouTube, and you can watch it at your leisure. So we're really excited to have Liz finish our spring season with that. So I'd love for all of you, if you're interested, to get involved with Ivy Creek. As I said earlier, if you can come out to the site, that's great. We'd love for you to do that. But if you can't, that's okay too. We have a wealth of information on our website. As I stated earlier, we have the kids page, and that's activities for kids of all ages. But we also are always looking for volunteers. You can go on our website, and on the top tab there, just click volunteer. All our 7 miles of trails are maintained by volunteers. And these dedicated people are out removing invasives when there's a windstorm, clearing trails to make sure people can walk, removing invasives, clearing trees, doing some restoration work. We also have volunteers that, once we can do in-person tours again, give tours through the barn and to school children. So we're always looking for volunteers. So if you're interested, please check that out. And if you want to stay connected with us, the best way is through our newsletter, especially since our buildings are still closed. And you can get that through the news tab on our website, and you can sign up for, we have monthly newsletters, and that's really the best way. We have audio tours as a way to keep people connected who either want to do the audio tour when you're on the trail, or if you aren't able to make it out, you can use your phone and it's like you're there. And so we'd love for you to sign up for our newsletter. And then also donate. 50% of our annual funding comes from individual donors just like you. So if you are a donor or a member, thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do this without you. And if you're not, we would love for you to make that investment in us to help us keep this beautiful natural and cultural history site open and preserved for many more generations. So that's Riverview Farm and the Ivy Creek Foundation. I'm now happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Well, thank you so much, Sue. That was fascinating. I love hearing about the Carr family. And I've allowed y'all to unmute yourselves, and you can also put questions or comments in the chat. So your choice. Virginia?
Me?
Yeah, are you?
Oh, I was thinking, I love the presentation, and my maiden name is Carr. So I always wondered if I'm related to that set of cars, and you're calling names out, and I haven't done a lot of ancestry on the Carr side of the family. My niece is into that. I don't know, I don't think she's on today, but I was listening to some of the names that you were calling out, the Hawkins, and I remember somewhere in the ancestry, Isaac married a Hawkins, I don't know if this, and that's one of the interests that I have about this property and about Hugh Carr, just trying to find out if he's somewhere in my ancestry on my father's side of the family. He was all out in Earlsville and that sort of thing.
Well, I would love to talk to you after this presentation. Carolyn has my email, or for all of you, Carolyn, can you put my email in the chat for everybody?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It's sue@ivycreekfoundation.org. And I'd love to talk to you, Virginia. We also have a whole genealogy part of the website that you can go to under the cultural history of Riverview Farm. And there's a tab on the right that says genealogy. And we've had many historians go through that and see that. And there's also on ancestry.com, there's a Hugh Carr. We have a lot of volunteer historians who've done a lot of work on the genealogy of the Carr, Greer, and Hawkins family. So yes, I would love to talk to you. And when I was talking to Manfred last week, one of the things that I was excited to talk to him about is that our foundation is really excited to be formalizing a descendant and community group committee, and we'll be talking to Manfred and the other descendants about that. And if you are welcome to participate. We would love for your feedback. But as we're interpreting the barn and coming up with plans for the farmhouse, we're working with the descendants closely to get their feedback and their intentions and will inserted in that process. As we're moving forward with that planning. So thank you so much for your feedback and comment today. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
There's a question in the chat. How did the farm come to be available so the foundation could take it up? In other words, what happened to the Conley Greer family?
Yes. Well, I was actually talking to Carolyn about that right before we started. So it's kind of a sad story. So Conley died in 1956, and he, like counterparts of today, as an African American worker, he was not paid the same as his white counterparts. Mary Carr, also wasn't paid the same as her, white counterparts in education. And so by the time, she was elderly, and she basically really couldn't pay the taxes of the land. She had a large farm, not much retirement. And so, she needed to, at her passing, her children and child and grandchildren didn't want to buy the farm, and didn't want to pay all the taxes on it. So it was basically up for sale, because they needed to sell it. And that's when Babs Conant and the Nature Conservancy stepped up and said, well, let's talk about, maybe this land could be preserved so as you saw in Eric's, so our site is not only Riverview Farm, but it's also Berkeley Bullock's farm as well, and another farm. So there's a couple farms in there because our site is 219 acres. So it's not all of Riverview Farm, because Earlysville Road has now bifurcated. Part of the original part of his farm was across the street, on Earlysville Farm Road. So. Any other questions or comments?
Maria, did you want to ask or say something?
Well, I was going to ask the same question. How come? What happened to the family? How come it became available to the Conservancy and then now owned by the city and the county? So that's answered. Thank you.
Fran, sure.
Conversational, but I right now live right behind the Union Baptist Church.
Fran, it's a little hard to hear you.
Okay, let me just stand up here and see if that makes it a little better.
Thank you.
I live in Townwood subdivision, and that's right down the street and around the corner from the church, the Union Baptist Church. So now it makes me wonder exactly where the school is. But I may have this story or glimmer of a story mixed up with something else in my mind. There was supposed to be some plan to build a housing development, I guess we call it nowadays, to be called Evergreen. Does that recall anything? Is there any detail about that, or is that just something that I've gotten mixed in?
I'm not sure what it was called, but a gentleman named Mr. Fleming, who was a local developer, was developing housing projects all in that area near Ivy Creek Natural Area. And it's talked about on our website. Liz Sargent in our Ivy Talk this Sunday could actually speak to that more. She's done a lot more research about that. So I'm not sure about that specific, but I know it was Mr. Fleming who was working on the development of the site that would become Ivy Creek Natural Area, and he was the one that the Babs Conant and the Nature Conservancy worked with in the city and county.
Another question: when did the Earlysville Road go through?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just started in 2019. Does anyone else know? I don't know.
No, but that is a great question, because I'm not from here. I've been here 20 some years, and I remember a greenish bridge going across Earlysville Road there, but I have no idea how old it is.
The reason I asked that, from looking at the maps that were in Eric's talk, the Ivy Creek, only the foundation only includes about half of Riverview Farm, and then some other bits So I was just wondering about how and when that other half got split off, because that was a famous old technique for ruining a community, is you just put a road right through the middle of it, and that's been done in cities. So I was wondering whether it was, I guess, after the Greer family lost possession of the road, or could have been before.
I think the road went through when Mary Carr was still alive.
Right.
I know what really killed that community, from what I've heard from previous board members and staff, was really the reservoir going in, because they flooded hydraulic mills, the actual town, and that was the heart of the African-American community. That's where the mill was. So, I mean, if we were to drain the reservoir, you'd see a mill in there. And I mean, they actually flooded that town. And that's what I heard was really the death knell to that community, was basically flooding it.
That would do it.
Yeah.
Maria said, are any artifacts excavated and preserved or displayed on site? Can anyone see them?
Well, because of the pandemic, no. On the website, yes. We in the barn, we have artifacts that are on display, and that's our hope with talks and planning. And Liz will talk about this on Sunday for the farmhouse. Is one of the ideas is to actually turn the farmhouse into a mini museum, to show some of the artifacts and things of that nature. We actually just contracted with a local archivist, and because we have many artifacts from the family, thousands of photos from the Carrs, from Manfred and his sisters, and other artifacts that we found, especially, and they're going to talk about this on Sunday, when we stabilized the farmhouse this summer. We actually took the whole roof off, and they found some old mason jars. And Jody, he has pictures, and he actually climbed up there to see what was up there. But yeah, there were mason jars and some other things. There was actually a trunk of some letters, that have been given to the family, but they gave it back to the foundation, and old papers and things like that. But that's the idea, that to start digitizing some of this, and that would go on our website so people had access to that. And there's also, I know when Mary Conley Greer's, all of his reports are actually in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., because he was, an extension agent. So when we want to see his reports, we actually go up to Washington, D.C. we can read his reports. He had to put in monthly reports, and he did that for 35 years. So we can talk about what was going on in the community. So we've done that. And then a lot of Mary Carr's papers and educational materials, the family donated that to the UVA library. And so they have a wealth of her personal letters and records and things like that at the UVA library that are free and open to the public. And those are, I'm pretty sure those are all digitized, and people can see those anytime.
Great. Anybody else? Any questions or comments?
I may have missed this. There were several other family holdings, several other farms, sort of in that strip. Are the descendants of those families still in the area?
They sure are. So Berkeley Bullock, who was the farm just southeast of Riverview Farm, he is buried at the Mount Zion Cemetery in Charlottesville, and one of his descendants is one of the caretakers of that cemetery, and they're trying to actually preserve that cemetery. That would be a great, Carolyn, presentation if they would come on and talk about all their work that they're doing. Excuse me. And so we are in contact with them, and one of the descendants was actually on our board for a long time, and now she's an advisor. And as part of our National Historic designation, we're working with her closely on the historic marker roadside sign that will be installed at Riverview Farm coming up. So yes, we are.
I know when you traverse some of the, I can't remember if it's the red or the orange or whatever, but you see some of these old walls. Were those dividing lines between farms? Do they know what those walls, who put them up? And I'm talking stone walls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just so people know.
Well,
not
there's a
big-
lot, yeah, and there's still wire fence up because there was cattle on the property and things like that. So some of those, I'm going to talk I'll answer your question in a roundabout way, Carolyn. So there
Great.
is a stone wall right by the farmhouse, and we're having the Ravenna Archaeological Services, Ben Ford is working with us on that wall. We recovered it just last fall. We didn't know how big it was because it was overgrown by invasives, and so we had volunteers out there all fall, spending every weekend. So they're now doing archaeological digs along that stone wall to get a sense. And so far, they think that original part of the footing of the wall is maybe even late 18th century. So before, but it's been repaired so many times. So we're at the very early stages of that. So for the other stone walls, I'm not sure that archaeological digs have been done on those footings to see how old those are. I think some of them are boundary markers, but the one by the farmhouse is looking at the mortar. From the meetings I've had, they said it's been rebuilt a couple times already. So we're looking to get that restored as well. We're working with a great mason. Now we just need to raise the money to get that wall rebuilt.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting.
Yeah.
The residents at Martha Jefferson House said thank you. They enjoyed a walk this morning at Ivy Creek and have enjoyed learning about Riverview Farm today.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All right. Well, Sue, thank you again for your time and oh, John, did you want to share something?
No, I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, well, that's a good share.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I look forward to if I can be impertinent, coming back and telling you, updates on what we've been doing and things like that.
You can be impertinent anytime you like, really. We love impertinent people here at the center, especially when it's stuff we're interested in. But thank you for that rich historical background. And I am really impressed, honestly, because you've just been here a couple of years. And I appreciate your attention to that historical component of this land, not just, oh, see the squirrels and see the trees, but like who owned it and how it was kept and preserving that. That's very meaningful. Thank you.
It's important. It's a wonderful, it's a rich part of our history and culture that needs to be recognized. And the family is truly inspiring and have left an incredible legacy for all of us to honor.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, thank you all for spending some time with us, and we will put this recording on our website at some juncture. So if you missed it or you want some friends to watch it, just shoot me an email or check out our YouTube website.
Helen was trying to say something.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
A question. I was just interested in whether the Nature Conservancy is still involved, what role it might be playing yet.
That's a great question. So the Nature Conservancy really doesn't play a role anymore. They came out on Martin Luther King Day to help us celebrate our day of service, and they were great with volunteering. But we don't really have a formal partnership with them anymore. It's something I'll probably look into, but that's a great question.
So their role was mainly in getting it started.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Is that Marie? Let's see. Yeah, Marie.
Excellent. I can't get my phone on.
Everything always happens at once, right? Okay. Let's see. Again, many thanks, many thanks. All right. And just, I'm sorry if I didn't say it, but you can unmute yourself. So just click unmute if there's something you want to share. Nope, I think we're good. Oh, yep. Okay.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Very happy.
We're wondering at Martha Jefferson House can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. We're wondering if, because you mentioned some other farms around the area, and we're wondering if those are still active today.
They're really not. I mean, the site is really for mainly single family homes in our area. And then if you're on, hydraulic, that is a lot of businesses now. And as Eric said, there's a couple of churches there, but it's really not active farming anymore.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Wait, Kristen was going to say something.
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for reminding me. Is there any way to assess what the quality of Riverview Farm as a farm was back in its day? I mean, because there, around Charlottesville, there are these vast tracts that are still used as farms today. Riverview, that area seems to me kind of, rocky, and it's got the river. The river is good, but the rocky part doesn't look to me like very easy farming.
Right. Well, okay, let's, get in our time capsule and think about after the Civil War. This hydraulic mills in Union Ridge was a space for, it was the area where freed African Americans were allowed to live, and then after emancipation grew.
Right.
And so let's think about, would people newly freed be given the best land?
No.
And so when you look at, my job before Ivy Creek, I taught people to be organic farmers. So I understand that farming aspect. And if you want to be a farmer, you want the flattest land possible,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And near water. So we were near water, which is great, but that land is rocky. It's not, flat. And when you look at some of those aerial photos on our site or in the PowerPoint, the area that was flat that Conley Greer you saw in the 30s and 40s, that's where he had his corn and things like that. So they would have had to do terracing. It would have been hard, back-breaking work. I don't know if any of you were farmers, but farming is hard. I mean, there's a reason that the average age of a farmer, and I'm putting my farming hat on, is 64 in Virginia, which is 7 years older than farmers across the U.S. It's back-breaking work. It's hard work, and Hugh Carr and Conley were doing that with horses and tractors and manually. I mean, that's why I was showing that picture of the tractor. I mean, he farmed almost his entire life without mechanized machinery, and a gas-powered engine. So it was hard. There's a reason that's where, that was the African American settlement. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it wasn't, yeah, it was not land that was ever going to be very productive. Because, I mean, unless you were raising goats or something, and I don't think people did raise goats back in those
But through
days.
all that, but that's what I hope you can take away from my presentation is even with all that, all those, you know, laid on top of, and he couldn't read, and he couldn't write, that he educated all of his children, 6 girls. I mean, as a farmer, you're hoping for 7 boys, right? Not 6 girls. That they were all educated. I mean, it could have been totally different, saying you're going to stay on the farm and help me work the farm, but instead, you know, they all went on to college. That is a big deal. And in Jim Crow South, all became successful in their own rights and community leaders. Mary Carr was linked with the NAACP and starting chapters. She also was president of several garden clubs in the area and won awards for that. We have a picture of her that we're going to put in the archives of her with Thurgood Marshall. She got an award from Thurgood Marshall for her work with the NAACP, and we're successful. And so, but through all that, still the largest landowner. I mean, we're able to talk about him because the family was able to keep that farm going for 100 years.
Wow.
That's why I'm here today. So incredible, inspiring.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And we know some of you have already gone, or well, if not talking to you, if you're still here, but you can, you're more than welcome to, if it's okay, we, chat for a few more minutes. If you have to go, we totally understand. There is a question: what was the land used for prior to Mr. Carr purchasing it?
It was a farm. So after, the Civil War, a lot of white landowners, because they lost their labor, had to sell off huge tracts of their farms to make it. And so it was a former white-owned landowner plantation.
Hence those walls that are older than the farm itself. Interesting.
I have one last, should be my last question. What was the land used for? He grew corn? Do we know?
Things. So farmers back then were, now farmers grow monocultures. You know what I mean by that? It's like one crop. That's modern farming. And so Hugh Carr, was an organic farmer. That's before the Industrial Revolution. So we didn't have chemicals and pesticides and things. So he had to plant a variety of crops and a variety of to keep pests away. He had, it was a working farm, so he had dairy, for his milk. He had chickens to, eat. Conley was really into pigs, and we think that was part of the extension. The extension was really promoting pork at that time, and so he was really into pigs and spoke a lot about that when we look at his records. About what swine to buy and purchase and raise and things like that. So, and we saw that Conley was also a generalist like that too. He did not plant monoculture. So it wasn't just that they were planting corn or soybeans or something like that. They had many different crops. And in the picture, the aerial photo from the 50s, you can see that behind the farmhouse, a huge garden back there. And we asked Manfred, because, he was a kid back then. And we said, well, what was grown here? And he's like, this was my grandma's vegetable garden. And her vegetable garden went from the end of their, garage all the way almost to the farm. I mean, that's almost like 3/4 of an acre of vegetables. That's a lot of vegetables. And he said she also had it's late in the day and I have a 20-month-old. I'm sorry, I got up at 5 this morning. An in-ground like canning, a cold storage. Someone help me. You know what I mean? Like a
cellar?
thank you, a cellar.
Yeah.
Sorry, a cellar. Yeah, she had an in-ground cellar just outside her kitchen where she stored all her preserves and canning and things like that. So he said that also there are always people over in the house that, you know, she taught not only the principal, but she kept teaching home economics. So she'd bring students over to talk about canning and preserving and have other women in the community talking about that. So he said the cellar was always full, huge. We'd probably have to do a dig to find it now because there is no cellar behind the house anymore. So we'd probably have to do a dig to try to find it. But Manfred, when we were out there last January, we had the city and county representatives there as well. So we know kind of where it was. But again, he was like, you know, he came when he was like 10 and left when he was 20. So you're using, you know, and that was in the 50s. So we'd have to do some digging around there to try to find it. But yeah. Great questions. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, farming is a hard life. And I mean, but this is, I mean, what a resource to see how people fed themselves and, you know, had some to sell and get some extra money then, but God, what a struggle.
Well, thanks so much, Sue. And thanks for all you're doing at Ivy Creek.